Is Cletus McFarland ready for Talladega? A certain comment from a chief officer at RCR says otherwise. While Cletus thinks he is ready, it's still in doubt whether Childress Racing and, more importantly, NASCAR will actually let that happen. So, what did he actually say? What did RCR say right after? And what does Cletus still need to prove before Talladega becomes real? Let's find out, because this story got a lot more serious than the post-race excitement made it sound. On Saturday, Cletus McFarland finished his first NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race at Rockingham in 32nd, 6 laps down, after an eventful day that included multiple saves, a pit road speeding penalty, a caution-causing spin, and a whole lot of survival. Then, after the race, he told fans, "See you guys in 2 weeks at Talladega," but RCR's Danny Lawrence responded by saying NASCAR may still want another race first because there were a lot of things they wanted to see happen that didn't happen. And that is exactly what we're covering today. First, what happened on Wednesday, when this whole RCR storyline really started to pick up speed. Then what Cletus said after Rockingham, why Danny Lawrence came in right behind him sounding much more cautious, what other respected names around the garage thought of the run, and then the big question at the end, realistically, does Cletus McFarland race Talladega later this month, or is this where the process slows down? So let's start with where it all began. On Wednesday, March 4th, Childress Racing officially announced that Garrett Mitchell, better known as Cletus McFarland, would make his NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series debut with RCR at Rockingham in the number 33, a Tommy's Express Chevrolet. RCR's announcement leaned into both sides of the story, his giant audience and his growth as a driver. The team said he had more than 4.6 million YouTube subscribers, noted his top 10 ARCA runs at Talladega and Charlotte in 2025, and positioned Rockingham as his next real step in stock car racing. That announcement lit up the usual debate immediately. Some people saw it as a fresh energy story, a popular creator with real racing interest getting a development chance with a major team. Others saw it as a shortcut. And honestly, I think that tension matters here because it explains why Rockingham was always going to be judged harder than a normal debut. Cletus wasn't just stepping into an O'Reilly car. He was stepping into an argument about whether fame and opportunity were moving faster than experience. That skepticism was not imaginary either. McFarland had made 4 ARCA starts in 2025, then made his truck series debut at Daytona in 2026. That truck debut ended on lap 6 after a self-spin. So when fans and analysts looked at the Rockingham promotion, they weren't reacting to some deep lower series resume. They were reacting to a driver still very early in the stock car learning curve, being handed one of the most visible development opportunities in the garage. But here's where the story started changing a little bit before the O'Reilly race even went green. Earlier on Saturday, McFarland ran the ARCA Menards Series East race at Rockingham and finished 4th. NASCAR's own Rockingham debut recap highlighted that as part of his double-duty day, and ARCA's post-race coverage featured him saying he had more confidence than ever in a stock car and that he had gone out there to turn left for Greg Biffle. That run didn't erase all the doubt, but it absolutely gave him a little credibility heading into the harder race later in the day. And I'll be honest, I think that 4th place ARCA run changed the emotional tone of the whole weekend. If he had been a total mess in that first race, then the O'Reilly debut would have felt like a looming disaster from the start. Instead, Rockingham suddenly looked like a day where maybe he could keep the car clean, learn something, and avoid making the wrong kind of headlines. Not contend, not shock the field, just survive. And that became a huge part of how the whole day was later judged. That is also why Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s advice mattered so much. Before the race, he told Cletus to stay out of the news, not try any hero stuff, and simply run laps and learn. That sounds simple, but for a driver in Cletus's position, it was exactly the right guidance. The objective at Rockingham was never supposed to be raw speed. It was supposed to be discipline, awareness, and finishing the day with something to build on. And once the race started, it became obvious why that advice was necessary. On lap 4, Cletus put himself in a 3-wide situation entering turn 1, got the number 33 sideways, and somehow made a remarkable save. It was spectacular in one sense, but it also showed the problem immediately. He still had moments where excitement and ambition outran judgment. That one sequence kind of previewed the whole afternoon. There would be flashes of instinct, but also a lot of moments where the edge looked way too close. He kept surviving though. Later in stage 1, Blake Lothian spun ahead of him, and Cletus barely missed him by diving to the apron. NASCAR described the miss as by inches. That's the kind of moment that changes the entire conversation if it goes just a little differently. If he clips that car, the day becomes exactly what the critics feared. Instead, he escaped again. And slowly that survival story started becoming the central theme of his debut. The race itself was still rough. NASCAR's recap says he made his biggest splash on lap 206 when the number 33 broke loose in turn 3, slid to the bottom, and then spun back up into traffic to bring out the 7th caution. On top of that, Motorsport reported he also had pit road speeding penalties and numerous half spins throughout the race. So no, this was not some secretly smooth performance, disguised by the finishing order. It was genuinely messy, but here's the part that changed everything. He finished. He completed the race. 244 laps, finished 32nd, and did it without destroying the car or wrecking a bunch of regulars in the process. That was the one outcome veteran observers kept circling back to. Not pace, not position, not highlights. Just the fact that he got to the end of one of the hardest development races he could have taken on. Before I get to the real contradiction between Cletus and RCR, do me a favor. If you're enjoying these NASCAR Central reports, hit like, share, and subscribe. This is still a growing channel. We're pushing past 4,000 subscribers, and if this one gets to 500 likes, that would be huge. That support really does help. After the race, Cletus sounded like Talladega was basically on. Motorsport quoted him saying, "So all in all, I made a ton of mistakes and I learned a lot. I hope to stay more out of the news than I did, but I have a lot to learn. And you know, all this internet talk, it got me thinking maybe I shouldn't come back. Sigh. See you guys in 2 weeks at Talladega." That's right. That is the Cletus version of the story. Hard day, a lot of mistakes, learned a lot. Now bring on the next one. The only problem is that Danny Lawrence came in right behind him and almost completely cooled that excitement down. Lawrence's first comment actually sounded encouraging. He said, "Well, it's a big step. This is a hard racetrack, and he did really good a couple of times where he could have spun the car out in front of everybody and didn't. I think if we were to go green tomorrow, he would be way better. He learned a lot in a short amount of time, and I think it shows everyone what a big step this is going into the O'Reilly series. I think he did a great job, but we gotta be better." That's support, but it is cautious support. And that last line is the part that matters most. We got to be better. Then came the real warning. Lawrence added, "Well, they'll look at everything. They might ask us to run another race because the thing about it is, we didn't get to do a live pit stop. There were a lot of things they wanted to see happen that didn't happen. When he got sideways early, we automatically went into this conservation mode of just keep rolling and don't push it too hard. So it's going to be close, but I would not be surprised if NASCAR didn't want us to run another race before we got to Daytona and Talladega. Everything happened so fast there that we all want to be prepared when we do take him there." Lawrence did not literally say, "He's not ready yet," but his message absolutely points in that direction. He openly said NASCAR may want another race. He openly said there were boxes left unchecked. He openly said they went into conservation mode after the early sideways moment. That's not what a team says when it believes the approval process is done. That's what a team says when the driver made progress, but the exam probably is not over yet. That is why the title works emotionally, even if the exact quote is stronger than what was said word for word. The warning is real, the doubt is real, and the possibility of a Talladega snub is also real. The official 2026 O'Reilly Series schedule lists Talladega for Saturday, April 25th, not 2 weeks from Rockingham, but still later this month, which means there is not much time for NASCAR to decide whether Rockingham was enough or whether another evaluation race has to happen first. And honestly, once you hear Lawrence's explanation, it makes sense. Talladega is not just another track, it is a super speedway, and NASCAR wanted Rockingham to show them certain live race situations before it greenlit that next step. Lawrence specifically said they didn't get to do a live pit stop, and that the team spent much of the day just trying to keep the car rolling after the early scare. In other words, Rockingham gave NASCAR some answers, but maybe not all the ones it wanted. What makes this even more interesting is that the broader garage reaction was actually pretty positive, just not blindly positive. Dillon told Cletus after the race, "You did good. The thing was, I could see you get excited and catch the guys in front of you, and you started launching it in there." He also told him he learned a lot and would be that much better if he reran it tomorrow. That's the kind of reaction that says, yes, the mistakes were obvious, but the learning was obvious too. Justin Allgaier sounded similar. Motorsport quoted him saying, "I thought Cletus did a great job. You know, he did a really good job this morning in the ARCA race to come home with the top 5, was just trying to figure out where he needed to be at today. He had one spin off turn 4. And I don't know what happened, but I do not envy his position at all. I know that today had to be really tough on him, especially with some of the social media stuff that he's had going against him the past few weeks, so I'm proud of him. He put in the effort and tried to make sure he was where he needed to be to have a solid day." That is not empty praise. That is a veteran saying the day was hard, imperfect, but respectable. But then Allgaier also dropped the line that brings us right back to Talladega. When asked whether he would trust McFarland enough to push him in the draft, Allgaier said, "Look man, I can't answer that because I think there's a couple that we race with weekly that I don't know that I would want to draft with at Talladega." That is such an interesting answer because it is both protective and non-committal. He respected the Rockingham run, but he absolutely did not turn that into a super speedway endorsement. That is really the heart of this story. Rockingham earned Cletus more respect. It did not automatically earn him Talladega. Those are two different things. Fans sometimes blend them together, but they are not the same. Finishing 250 laps at Rockingham without wrecking people is a real achievement for someone at his experience level. Getting thrown into a giant drafting pack at Talladega is a completely different test, with a completely different risk profile. RCR and NASCAR both know that. And that is also why I think the most honest takeaway is this. Cletus helped himself at Rockingham, but he may not have finished the job. He showed he could learn. He showed he could listen. He showed he could survive a hard day. He even showed some racecraft in the sense that he kept the car out of bigger trouble multiple times. But the team's own words tell us there are still pieces missing. And if those pieces matter to NASCAR's superspeedway approval process, then Talladega is still up in the air. His own post-race comments kind of support that reading too. He admitted, "I had a ton of confidence, and then I spun out," and later said, "At that moment, I was like, I have put myself in the worst position I could possibly be in right now, and I am way in over my head, but I knew we just had to get to the end, and that's what we did." That is not the voice of a driver pretending he has this all figured out. That's the voice of a guy who knows he is improving, but also knows he is still in the deep end. So realistically, do I think he races Talladega? I think it is close. And I think RCR's quote tells us the answer depends less on Cletus's confidence and more on whether NASCAR feels Rockingham checked enough boxes. If NASCAR is satisfied with the survival, the awareness, and the fact that he finished without creating major trouble, then Talladega can happen. If NASCAR decides that the missing live pit stop element and the early conservation mode left too much uncertainty, then they may want one more race first. That's not punishment. That's process. And further in NASCAR races, I think he absolutely gets more chances. RCR signed him for a 3-race O'Reilly deal, and nothing about Rockingham sounded like a team regretting the move. If anything, the tone from RCR, Dillon, and Allgaier suggests the opposite. The experience was hard, but useful, and the ceiling is still open if he keeps learning the right way. The question is not whether he disappears from NASCAR. The question is whether the next step comes immediately at Talladega or after one more proving ground race. Cletus thinks he is ready enough to keep going. His fans want to believe him, but RCR just told everybody that readiness is still under review, and NASCAR may want more evidence before putting him in that environment. That is the contradiction. That is the drama. And that is why this story is suddenly so much more interesting than just another influencer runs a race headline. So subscribe to NASCAR Central for more breaking NASCAR news, controversy, approvals, reactions, and all the biggest stories from around the garage. Drop a like and let me know in the comments. Did Rockingham prove enough for Cletus McFarland to get Talladega? Or do you agree with RCR that the process needs one more race first? And for early access to videos like this, become a member. It costs less than a cup of coffee.